Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jed Lee. So good to see you. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very happy and absolutely honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in that mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Player FM, Boomplay Ghana, and wherever you find your favorite shows. We have two wonderful guests for you. Dr. Irene Daria will be here to celebrate I Didn't Believe Him. And we take a deep dive into the best ways that we can help our kids learn to read. And later in the show, we go to a live event, the Author Palooza in Norwalk, Connecticut, to speak with Barbara Ehrentrau, the author of If I Could Be Like Jennifer Taylor.
Come one, come all, for the mind-bending, dungeon-stomping, time-shifting, dragon-slaying adventure of a lifetime.
What's happening?
Something bigger is happening here.
Yeah.
And someone else is calling these shots. Yeah.
I'm your biggest fans. I don't want you dying in the third episode. Guardians of the Game is a real play Dungeons & Dragons podcast that's sure to excite and delight listeners of all ages.
How would you like your very own circus show right here?
Something good or something bad?
That is up to interpretation.
Whether you're a seasoned D&D veteran or looking for a wholesome but epic way to get into the game for the first time, Guardians of the Game has you covered. Let's get gaming, Guardians.
Well, my work here is done.
Guardians of the Game premieres on September 18th with new episodes every Wednesday.
Hey, my friends, when should you start to talk to your kids about money? Well, if you ask me, I would say as soon as possible. Helping our kids become financially literate is so very important. And thanks to owningthedash.com, talking to your kids about money and finances is easier than ever. Anthony Delaunay is a financial dad advisor and the founder of Owning the Dash LLC, an organization dedicated to promoting childhood financial literacy and family financial freedom. Delaunay has written a series of award-winning children's picture books that each teach basic lessons about money. He has also authored 2 financial self-help books geared towards helping young couples start their financial journey and towards helping older couples prepare for their transition into retirement. Owning the Dash empowers families by providing books, games, and activities that introduce fundamental financial lessons in a fun and engaging way, encouraging kids to think about certain scenarios and how they might respond, and help prepare kids for when they have to make important money decisions later in their life. All 5 of Anthony's books have been named Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Reads and would make a great addition to your family library. To learn more, please visit owningthedash.com. Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from Long Island in the great state of New York. Our guest is here today to celebrate her memoir. It's called I Didn't Believe Him. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Irene Daria. Hey, Dr. Irene, how are you?
I'm great, Jedley. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. I love that the title of your book is really interesting, but the subtitle, the very long subtitle is, I think, fantastic. I didn't believe him. My son told me his school wasn't teaching him to read. I told him to trust his teacher. This is a story of what happened next. So tell us what happened next.
What happened next? Oh boy. It's still hard to talk about, Jed Lee. Isn't that funny? Even after the book is done and it's between covers, it's, what happened next? Well, what happened was my son came home from school one day and in kindergarten, and he said, Mommy, my school isn't teaching me how to read. They tell us to look at the words and guess what they tell us to look at the pictures and guess what the words are. And that's not reading, Mommy. How do you read? And so let me just repeat that. Sorry, because I got a little emotional there. So what he said was, Mommy, my school isn't teaching me how to read. This is a 5-year-old boy. They tell us to look at the pictures and guess what the words are. And that's not reading, Mommy. How do you read? And to this day, it breaks my heart that my response to him was, Eric, you go to a great school. They really know what they're doing. Trust them. And I said this even though I had just attended a presentation that the school did for parents on how it taught reading, and I understood not a word of it. And either did any of the other parents in the room. But it was a very, very well-regarded school. It was a school that kids test to get into. It's a public school, but very, competitive, rigorous, had great test scores, just had such an amazing reputation. And in that parent presentation, what they told us was indeed what my son said, that these books will teach your children how to read. And they showed us these little books that had patterns in them, like, a house is a home, a teepee is a home, an apartment building is a home. So certain words are repeated. And then the kids can look at the picture and guess what the word might be, like apartment building. And they told us, do not teach when you read with your child at home, do not sound out words with them. You could, but why would you want to when there are so many other strategies for you to use? So I thought, okay, this doesn't make any sense, but they must know what they're doing and they will teach him how to read. My son went from being a very extroverted, happy little boy to being a boy who was sitting in the back of his classroom, sort of bowing his head in shame. I didn't know why he was bowing his head. I didn't know why he was so quiet. He would come home from kindergarten and just so unhappy. He started not wanting to go to school. In January of his kindergarten year, he brought home his first book ever to read. The school would send home little tiny books for them to read. And the book was called After School. And it went like this. After school, I watch TV. So Eric, sitting next to me, very rigid and tense and unhappy looking, read those words. And I thought, what is he talking about? Look at what he's reading. This is amazing reading for a 5-year-old. After school, I watch TV. After school, I play with my brother. And I'm thinking, look at what he can do. They really know what they're doing. Then he gets to, after school, I have. Now, let's pretend that we're a 5-year-old boy. We don't know how to read that word on the page. He has to look at the picture. The picture is of a girl sitting on a couch, holding on her lap a plate with a sandwich on it, and in her hand a glass of milk. So we, and a 5-year-old, would quote unquote read those words as, after school I have a glass of milk, right? That's like a good guess. Or, which is what he said. And I said, no, that's not the word. Try it again. After school, I have a sandwich, because there's a picture of a sandwich, right? No, that's not the word. Try it again. And then he kept guessing and guessing and getting it wrong and getting more and more frustrated. And finally I said to him, the word is snack. And he said, well, how am I supposed to know that? How is he supposed to know that, right? And I tried to get him to sound out each of the letters. he had no idea how to. So just to explain a little bit, and this is what I do in the book, I weave in our story, which really people have said to me because the advanced reviews are in, and people are saying this is so gripping and compelling. It reads like a novel. So there's our story woven in with explanations of what I didn't know at the time. And what his school was doing, it was using a method of teaching reading, which has been in the national news over the past couple of years. There's a great podcast called Sold a Story that's been downloaded more than 8 million times that talks about it. It's been on the front page of I think every major newspaper, that schools have been teaching reading incorrectly. And what they have, not all, I have to really stress that some schools are doing a great job teaching kids to sound out words. They teach phonics. They do a fantastic job. But a lot of schools have been teaching reading all wrong. And what they do is they use a method, the umbrella term for it is balanced literacy. But it's really a method called 3Qing. They teach the kids to use 3 cues or clues to try to figure out what words are. They look at the pictures and guess. They use context, like what could it be, based on the rest of the sentence, and just the first letter of the word. They believe that phonics is sort of unnecessary to teach. That's a very important distinction. It's not that they believed phonics was unnecessary, but they believed that reading was as natural as learning to speak. We as babies learned how to speak by just being spoken to, and the belief was that children learn to read by being read to. So if you read to them often, you expose them to a lot stories that they love, they will be motivated to read, and they will figure things out basically on their own. Phonics was taught in a very sporadic way when it came up in a story. So for example, if there was a word with a silent E at the end of it and a long vowel like cane, the teacher might do a quick little mini lesson on, when E is at the end of a word, it makes the vowel say its name. And often parents would go to teachers and say, my son or my child doesn't know the silent E rule. And the teacher's response would be, he was absent that day. You can't learn a phonics rule in one day. You just can't. Well, I shouldn't say you can't, because like anything in life, the ability to learn to read happens on a spectrum. And some kids are wired to really learn easily and quickly, and maybe they've had some phonics exposure at home, because you really can't factor out what is done in the home or before they get to kindergarten and first grade. And then those kids, would do okay. But really the majority of kids, more than 2/3 of the kids, struggled with learning to read, and their parents hired tutors or they taught them themselves. Just to get back to our story. So Eric had really a dreadful kindergarten year. He started having nightmares, literally shrieking during the night. Like I thought he fell out of his bunk bed, screaming, dreaming that he was drowning. He felt like he was drowning, because imagine being a 5. He was at a school that was in an upscale neighborhood and a lot of the families had taught their kids how to read before they started school. They were very proactive with working with their children, and I did not know that. I used to call us the downtown dummies because we lived downtown in Greenwich Village, and we traveled all the way to the Upper East Side to take them to this fabulous school. And in our area, parents just didn't do that. Our kids played. I'm a I was studying to be a developmental psychologist, and your kids are supposed to play when they're little, not in at least that's what I believed then. Mm-hmm. I still believe they have to play, but I also believe that parents, ideally if it feels right to them, I would never tell someone they should or have to do something. But if it interests them and they have the opportunity to, if they work with their kids a bit on reading at home, I think that's just the greatest gift that they could give to their children. So he finally got through to me in first grade. So summer came and I realized he couldn't read a word. I went to the library and I got him some easy little books to read. He had no idea how to read. I tried to teach him how to sound out words. I was just making a mess of things. And I decided, okay, I'm going to talk to other parents at the school. I'll find out what they did and I'll just figure out what's going on. But it was summer. We were having fun. The pressure was off. He was happy. I was happy. And honestly, I let it slide. And that's another regret. I have a lot of regrets that I didn't believe him. That title carries a lot of weight and guilt in it, you know, that I didn't listen to him when he told me his school wasn't teaching him how to read. So first grade comes, he goes back to school and he comes home after a few weeks really angry, like with an angry, I shouldn't say really angry, with an angry look on his face. He says to me, "Mommy, you want to see how I read? I'll show you how I read." Oh, I have to interject this. He brought home great grades in reading in kindergarten. Fabulous grades. Everything was wonderful, according to his teacher. So, okay, now my boy is 6 years old. He comes home from first grade. An entire year has passed without him learning how to read a word. And I just keep going back to it. Imagine what that felt like for him. Mm-hmm. Most of the other kids, not all of them, there were other kids in his school in the same boat. And, you know, I found those parents quickly, you know, and we commiserated and helped each other. But most of the kids were reading because they had learned before they started school how to do so. Okay, so first grade comes, he comes home. "Mommy, you want to see how I read? I'll show you how I read." He took one of those little pattern books and he held it behind his back and he turned the page at exactly the right time for each of the sentences, right? And so it was, in fact, the book that I used as an example for a pattern. It was a book where it said a house is a home, a teepee is a home, an apartment building is a home. So he memorized every single picture and the sentence was easy to memorize. And that's when I realized, oh my God, my kid had memorized every single book his teacher had read to him. And that's why it seemed to her like he was reading. It's why it seemed to me like he was reading, when in reality, he had absolutely no idea how to read. So I rolled up my sleeves and I began figuring out how to teach him how to read. Now I'm a developmental psychologist. I was back in school studying. I had been a journalist and a writer, and books were it in our home. We loved to read. He loved being read to. He loved stories. Every night I read to him for pleasure, for the joy of reading. I know that's what your show is focused on, the pleasure and joy of reading. We had that in our home. We had stories. We had, you know, piles of books. I was parenting at a magazine at that time and actually got all sorts of free copies of children's books. So you name it, that book was in our, you know, house. And he loved stories, loved reading. But I switched from a clinical psychology track to developmental psych. I began researching this, and I realized how many kids had been labeled learning disabled just because they hadn't been taught how to read, not because there was anything neurologically wrong with them. And I thought, oh my God, this is really a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And so to make a very long story short, because I know I can't cover the whole story. I scrambled to figure out how to teach him to read. I was on the computer, you know, day and night looking for resources, for worksheets, for what I should teach him next. I actually wrote, I'm not sure, Jedley, if you're aware of this, but I also wrote a series of workbooks that parents can use to teach their kids to read, which uses the curriculum that I put together for my courses. So jumping way ahead in the story, I don't want to give too much away, but we had a very happy ending, and Eric became just a stellar student. And I became a developmental psychologist specializing in teaching kids how to read. I did my dissertation on how kids learn to read, and actually looked at why are some kids able to learn in the whole word method, and why do other kids need to be taught phonics. And now I own a tutoring company, and we teach children how to read. So.
This episode is brought to you by Daphne Draws Data. From the imaginative mind of best-selling author Cole Nussbaumer Knaflick and the vibrant illustrations of John Skewers comes a story that will captivate kids and grown-ups alike. Daphne is not your ordinary dragon. She doesn't breathe fire. She breathes life into numbers, turning them into pictures that solve mysteries, forge friendships, and save the day. Daphne's journey celebrates unique talents, the power of teamwork, and the beauty of seeing the world through a different lens. This dragon's tale is perfect for parents and educators to inspire the next generation of curious minds and innovative thinkers. Get your copy today. Daphne Draws Data. Before we invite our guests into the studio, I want to ask you, are you looking for a unique way to support diverse voices in literature? Introducing By YQ Book Fairs, where every page tells a story of empowerment, culture, and diversity. By YQ Book Fairs is a 100% women and minority-owned initiative showcasing a hand-picked selection of diverse books that celebrate inclusivity and representation. From captivating narratives to thought-provoking poetry, our curated collection has something for everyone. And hosting a By YQ Book Fair is a super easy and a fantastic way to raise funds for your organization or cause. So why wait? Visit buyobq.com today to learn more about how you can bring the magic of diverse literature to your community while supporting women and minority-owned businesses. I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
When balanced literacy was introduced to this school, I can kind of relate to this school because I also grew up outside of Boston in a town I grew up in a poor neighborhood in a very wealthy town that had this phenomenal reputation. Their school system had a phenomenal reputation. They taught us how to write in a very experimental way. Just my school, just the poor kids. And I became a very good writer. But when I transferred out of that system to go to a very traditional Catholic high school, I quickly found out that I hadn't learned English grammar. And Latin was one of the classes I had to take. And I was working really hard, and a very, very kind man, my father, John Waterbury Kelly, he saw how hard I was working. I had vocabulary down, but there's just, when it came to flu perfect tense and all this other stuff, I had absolutely no idea. And he knew exactly what the problem was. But it was really too late for me to learn it at that point. And I survived, and I'm here. But so I can relate to that. You know, I was someone in that kind of dealt with an experimental style of learning. When they brought balanced literacy into the schools, was it like, did they have science behind it that said
no?
Okay. And that's frustrating because I think there's a lot of stuff going on in schools in our society happening to kids, and there's no real science behind.
I need to qualify my answer a little bit. They had no valid, recognized, there's science and then there's science, right? There are studies that are controlled experiments where you have a group of randomly chosen people and you have a finding, and that finding can be repeated. That's considered science. Mm-hmm. And then there's something called junk science, or I don't want to call this particular method junk science, but it's to be taken, it's to be carefully considered, where studies are observational. You're just watching something happen, or one person does a study, and, that study maybe has some flaws where it's not carefully constructed. So the person who introduced actually balanced literacy goes back to an even earlier wacky method called whole language. And whole language was introduced in our country by two professors. One of them was named Kenneth Goodman. And Kenneth Goodman did what he believed, and the word believed is very important. Kenneth Goodman did what he believed was a valid study. So when I say there's no science, the believers, and it was all belief, right? Until the year 2000. Remind me to come back to the year 2000. Yeah. There were like the believers of whole language, and there were the believers in phonics. And but this goes back, this problem with reading goes back all the way to the 1920s, believe it or not. That's when the progressive era, before the 20s, phonics was the norm in schools. The 1920s came, and that was the progressive era, where a lot of changes happened in our society and a lot of changes happened in education and in schools. And phonics was sort of booted out, and the whole language way, not the whole language way, a whole word method was put into place in the schools. It was called Look, Say. And that's where the Dick and Jane readers were developed to support this Look and Say method. There was actually a Dick and Jane curriculum that went with it. And with those books, in the beginning, because the curriculum came to be revised, as parents and teachers too complained, like, this is really ridiculous. The alphabet was not even mentioned. Words were introduced like symbols, like they are in the Chinese language, and kids memorized the words. And they would learn the word skate, for example, by pretending to roller skate in their classrooms, or I'm not kidding, dancing to waltz music, to move. They would bring what they called meaning to the words, but they were never taught to sound them out. Everything was memorized, and the children learning to, and each little book had like 13 or so words in it. So each book incrementally introduced new words. But the problem was if kids saw, and they would be like, oh, look, Jane, see, funny Dick. Like, how often do you need to read, or oh, Jane? You don't have to read the word O-H, that often, right? The is the most frequently used word in our language, but the didn't appear very often in Dick and Jane stories. So kids learned to read by memorizing words, and that's how this whole sight word list came to be. A professor named Edward Dolch realized, wow, kids can only read the words that are in their Dick and Jane stories. He came up with a list of the most frequently used words in the English language, and teachers began teaching kids to memorize those words. So everything was done from memory. Now comes Kenneth Goodman then came Why Johnny Can't Read. Have you heard of that book in the 1950s? Okay. He was the first one to say, our schools are teaching reading all wrong. And Look, Say sort of got booted out of schools, and phonics came back to some schools, but along came this professor, Kenneth Goodman. Now, Kenneth Goodman did what he believed was a study. He looked at struggling readers. He didn't call them struggling readers. He looked at readers who were reading text that was above their ability to read. Or, he would just, I'm not 100% sure how he chose the passages. I read his study several times, and I don't remember him saying how he chose the passages. But what he observed was these children were having trouble reading. And what they did to figure out the word was they used the picture to guess, they used context clues to guess, and they used only the first letter of each word. Now, bear with me, okay? Those three cues are exactly how dyslexic children read. It's how struggling readers read who have never learned phonics, who have never learned how to sound out words. So this guy, Kenneth Goodman, the founder of Whole Language, took his study and said, oh, this is how children really read. This is what they naturally bring to reading. This is what we need to teach children. Instead of teaching phonics, we need to teach children to guess what the words are by looking at the picture, to use context clues, and only the first letter of each word. Now, these kids were using only the first letter because they didn't know how to sound out the rest of the letters. And it like makes my hair curl. This was the science, quote unquote, behind Whole Language. So all of those kids beginning in the late 1960s, early 70s began being taught how to read just like struggling readers do. And schools turned those millions of kids into struggling readers. So then along came the reading wars because parents were up in arms. I mean, it's sort of like common sense, right? It's an alphabetic language. You need to know how to sound out words. Mm-hmm. And it was done under President Clinton and then completed under President Bush. The U.S. government convened something called the National Reading Panel. It asked Congress to put together a group of experts to put an end to these reading wars because real research had been done by cognitive scientists, by researchers in schools of cognitive psychology. They operate completely separately from schools of education. So the schools of education on the campuses weren't aware of the research going on by the cognitive scientists, but cognitive scientists could certainly tell you through many, many, many valid, well-designed studies that kids need phonics in order to learn how to read. So Congress convened this National Reading Panel to go over all of this research. Any research. It wasn't just go over the phonics research. It was go over the whole language research, but there wasn't much whole language research, right? There was all observational studies, or in my classroom, kids did this, or, they looked at one student. And then there were these other studies that were properly designed, and they looked at everything that was out there and came up with what are now known as the 5 pillars of reading instruction, what kids need to know in order to learn to read well. It's phonemic awareness, being aware of the sounds that you hear when words are spoken. And I know many parents listen to your show, so I just want to make this very important point. If you ever work with your kids on learning letter sounds, tell them, explain to them what you're talking about. Because sometimes people say, oh, this letter is A. A makes the sound A. And some kids accept that, and other kids are like, what are you talking about? That's just a letter on a page. It doesn't make any sound. I don't understand. So really say to them, when we talk, we make sounds, and each word is composed of different sounds. And when we write, we use letters to stand for those sounds. Mm-hmm. And when you teach kids a sound, show them the letter that you're talking about. But anyway, so phonemic awareness is being aware of the sounds that you hear when words are spoken. So they need that. They need phonics, the ability to sound out words on a page. They need vocabulary, and vocabulary comes from the environment, but vocabulary really comes from reading. So this is where you want that joy of reading and the early reading. You want to really make sure that happens, because if kids love reading, they're going to read and their vocabularies are going to expand. You need comprehension, and comprehension comes from an awareness of the world, from being taught. And this is another, I won't necessarily use the word experimental, but progressive. Like in education, there are progressive schools and traditional schools. So your later school that you went to was a traditional school. They taught. That's the key word. You know, the teacher stood at the front of the room and taught a lesson, and the kids were expected to learn it, and there would be a test or a quiz or something, and that's traditional. Progressive schools believe that kids learn best by discovering things on their own. And the teacher, instead of being in a traditional school, the teacher is called a sage on a stage, imparting lessons. In a progressive school, the teacher is considered a guide on the side, sort of helping kids make discoveries. So in progressive schools, a lot of content knowledge was not taught because kids were discovering things on their own. It wasn't like, okay, in our social studies curriculum, we need to cover modules A, B, C, and D. You know, they would study a tribe of Indians maybe for 6 months, and they, you know, each child would learn, make a project on different things, on their home, on their food, on their this, and then the kids would share. So the content base often is not there for kids to understand what they're reading. Like, for example, I tutored a little girl who had never heard of cowboys, and she just had no clue what was going on in the story because she didn't know what a cowboy was. You know, so just to reiterate, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, or, you know, which is supported by an awareness of the world, and fluency, which is stopping at periods, punctuation, and being able to read easily so that it's not choppy, it flows. And the meaning isn't lost. If you don't stop at a period, you can really mess up your understanding of what's being said. But going back to the National Reading Panel, so the National Reading Panel reviewed over 100,000 studies, came up with those 5 pillars of reading instruction, and that happened in the year 2000. And again, there was this big, you know, uproar, you know, how can we have been doing this to kids? And whole language got tossed out of schools, or so parents thought. It was actually renamed balanced literacy. Now, balanced literacy in its original incarnation was really a good thing. It was supposed to include, you know, kids having authentic texts and reading for pleasure, but also the teacher teaching explicit, systematic phonics lessons. That did not happen in most balanced literacy classrooms. I never want to make an edict that it didn't happen, because some teachers snuck it in on the side. You know, they realized, well, kids need phonics. This is silly. I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna teach it to them. But Ken Goodman actually, in an introduction to one of his books, said he wanted to do a shout out to all teachers who were told what to do, but then closed their classroom doors and didn't listen. So, like, you know, what goes on in a classroom is very much dependent on the individual teachers. But I just want to make sure I'm getting across everything that's important to get across. In the year 2000, legislation was passed in many places saying that schools had to teach phonics. And this often was done in New York. That happened only in Title I schools, which were schools that received federal funding for poorer students. Okay, so sorry, I'm giving a lot of information here. I just want to make sure that I'm presenting it clearly. So first came Look-Say in the 1920s. That got tossed out of schools in the late 1950s, but was replaced by whole language, which was also not good. Whole language got tossed out of schools in the year 2000 after the National Reading Panel's findings, but that was replaced by balanced literacy, which claimed to be the best of both worlds. It claimed that it used, whole language methods and that kids were taught phonics. They did begin to be taught phonics, but they were taught in that sporadic helter-skelter way that I mentioned. There were not worksheets, there were not lessons. One rule didn't build, because you're supposed to learn short A first, and then, short like cat, hat, and then, words with AN at the end. And you systematically build, and you introduce a few sight words into that. It was not taught in that way at all. So kids continued to struggle to learn how to read.
Yeah. One of the things, and we could probably talk for weeks, but we were not able to on the podcast. But one of the things that we should all take away from this conversation is going back to what we've advocated. Parents, you are your kids' first and most important teacher. You have to be aware of how your kids are being taught. And unfortunately, I think we also have to be aware of the fact that schools have become very politicized. And you need to be in there. You need to be aware. You can't do what Dr. Irene did, which is just to trust the teacher and not investigate. So I think that these are very valuable lessons. It's very frustrating to me that that we don't just sit down and have an IEP, an individual education plan for every kid, and sit down and say, this kid is really strong in reading but needs extra help in math. The idea that every kid is going to learn the same way is ridiculous. And I love teachers. I love schools. They're really important, but I'm not crazy about the system that teachers have to work under. And I am so thankful that you wrote I Didn't Believe Him, so that we can get parents thinking about these different issues. Where can people go to find out more about this memoir and find out more about those workbooks that you created? Sure.
So the memoir is being published on August 20th. It will be available on Amazon. People can go to my website. It's called stepstoreading.com. There's a lot of free information on there. There's a wonderful video that is called How to Teach a Child to Read. It will walk parents through I don't want to say every step of the way, but every step of the way to teach a beginning reader how to read. Really valuable. I wish I had it when I was trying to figure out how to teach reading. And there's also information on the Steps to Reading workbooks, and there are free resources for them to download, free phonics games. So that website is really a font of information for them. And I just want to sort of just say about the book, we've been talking very seriously, and it's a very, very serious topic, but I just really want to stress that this book is a memoir, and I have written and published 3 books before this, and I also have written novels. This book is a joy to read. This book, it's about how schools turn kids into struggling readers, but it's also about my love for my son and his love for me and the path that we went on together. It gives you, insight into life, living life in New York and how this impacted our family. And there are a lot of scenes of family life. There are scenes where Eric brings home a terrible report card, and I don't tell him it's terrible. He can't read, right? So he doesn't know what it says. And I tell him he got a great report card because he's such a smart kid. He went on to be salutatorian of his very rigorous high school and won all sorts of awards, and now has an amazing career as a computer science engineer. And none of this would have happened if I hadn't worked with him. But there are scenes like he thinks he's gotten this great report card, and he's in our house on Long Island. We had a weekend house on Long Island, and he goes upstairs to the loft and he pulls out balloons and he starts blowing up balloons. And I think he's celebrating because he had actually read beautifully with me earlier that day. And he's celebrating what he thinks is a wonderful report card. So we then had a celebration for this report card and actually sang to him, like happy birthday, happy wonderful report card to you. And my heart is breaking because I thought if he knew, right? I mean, his report card was terrible, but I kept it from him. His school thought there was something, they started saying they thought there was something wrong with him. And not with its teaching methods. And I just want to get that message across to parents. If your child learns and is learning with you, chances are there's nothing wrong. It's when the child doesn't make progress that there's an issue. So my point is, this is a really, really charming, lovely book full of love and compassion that is a joy to read. It's not like a treatise on, what our schools have done wrong. It's really like the tale of a mother and child triumphing together and reaching an amazingly happy ending together and learning lots of lessons that I think will be really valuable to many, many families.
Awesome. We've had a great time speaking to the author of I Didn't Believe Him. Our guest has been Dr. Irene Daria. Dr. Irene, thanks so much for being with us.
Sure. Thank you.
This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Carol Selleck's Musical Me collection of picture books. This collection inspires kids to embark on a musical journey, and you're going to love it. Play For Me, Peter captures the excitement, challenge, and joy of making music. Sing For Me, Sarah encourages children to step into the spotlight and find their own voice with a beautiful original song at the end of the book. And at the end of Play For Me, Peter, you're going to find an original song to help kids learn how to read music and play a musical instrument. Both Play For Me, Peter and Sing For Me, Sarah are available at Amazon and at Carol's website, carolselleckbooks.com. Back here in Norwalk, Connecticut at the Authorpalooza in Norwalk. And my guest right now is Barbara Ehrentrau. Barbara, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Barbara was sharing with me that she had a radio show that talked about books and authors.
Yes, I did. It was called Books and Entertainment, Tales from the Pages, and it was on once a month, and I would interview authors. It was lots of fun.
Yeah. So tell us about the book that you're sharing with people today.
It's called If I Could Be Like Jennifer Taylor, and it is a book about a girl who does not feel good about her body, and she's been bullied by this perfect girl, Jennifer Taylor. Jennifer wants to be in the Olympics, and she is a gymnast. And so Jennifer has a terrible problem. Carolyn finds out one day in school, actually the first day of school, when she finds out that Jennifer is going to be taking her to the nurse after she fainted. Carolyn is so upset about the bullying that she fainted in gym. And then when she gets to the gym, Jennifer says, okay, I'll keep this secret, but you have to do something for me. And so she winds up doing her homework, and then they become friends. Wow. And she finds her secret, which is something that I don't want to give away, but it's something that a lot of girls struggle with.
Yeah.
And it's about holding secrets and keeping secrets for each other. She has to keep it from her not popular friends, and Jennifer's very popular, and so she keeps the secret for a long time.
Wow. Sounds like a great middle grade novel.
I think kids will love it. There's even a little romance in there. Jennifer is going out with this, the quarterback of the high school football team, and he's a sophomore, and she's, in middle school, so there's a big deal about that. And my character, Carolyn, has a big crush on him.
Now, what inspired this story?
I was going to Manhattanville College, and there was an creative studies week going on, and there was going to be a workshop with Paula Danziger. I don't know if anybody remembers her, but Paula was a really big children's author. So I wanted to get into that workshop, but to get into it, I had to write 3 pages of a children's story. And that night, I took something from my daughter, and I divided her into 2 characters. So she's both Carolyn and Jennifer. And that's how it started. And I brought the 3 pages to Paula. And Paula looked at them when I had my chance to be with her, individually. And she wrote, cut, cut, cut on every single page. And not only that, but this is the kind of person Paula was. She took the pages, turned it over, and rewrote my story for me.
Wow.
So the first page of my story is very much like Paula.
Wonderful. Wow, that must have been a real thrill for you.
It was. I kept those pages. They're like in plastic now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how does it feel knowing that your book is out there and making a difference in young people's lives?
Well, it feels really good. The other day, I had given my neighbor's children one of the books, and she read it. She was only 8, and I said to my neighbor, you think she'll be able to really understand it because there's some heavy things in that book? She said, oh, no, she'll be fine. So she read it, and then she came back and wanted to talk to me, and she said, I love the book. I loved it. I said, well, what made you love it? She said, it's so real. It's about real people. And I said, don't you read things about real people? She said, no. She said, a lot of it is not about real people. So I like that I'm making a difference, that I'm getting things about this particular problem, which a lot of girls have, into the hands of children. And I love it when they come and tell me how wonderful it made them feel.
That's fantastic. Is there a website people can go to find out more about you and your book?
Yes, you can go to my blog, Barbara Ehrentrau, Barbara.Ehrentrau at blogspot.com. My website is being done now, but it will be Barbara Ehrentrau, so you just look that name up. I'm on Amazon too. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Threads.
And remind us again the name of the book.
The name is If I Could Be Like Jennifer Taylor, and it was actually published in 2011, but republished in a brand new cover right now, and it is the first book of a series, the Mill Valley High series. All of the girls go to Mill Valley High, and you will meet them in the first book. Then in the second book, Who is Jennifer Taylor, which is coming out soon, you will see, their interactions. And in the third book, you'll see them as juniors, and it'll be very wonderful. It'll be lots of romance and fun.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids, and we hope it inspired you to join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We also kind of hope it inspired you to leave a review. 5-star reviews are awesome, but an honest review on whatever podcasting platform you may be listening to the show. And if you're listening on the AM/FM 24/7 radio network, let your local station manager know that you like Reading with Your Kids. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Dr. Irene Daria. Please be sure to check out I Didn't Believe Him. And also want to thank Barbara Ehrentrau. Please be sure to check out her middle grade novel. It's If I Could Be Like Jennifer Taylor. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Judy Hu, Stella Sheree, Hannibal Sanj, Alyssa Montiero, Devin Hill, Riley Oluwu. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you on the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.